little bit of history and a little bit of introduction. So my name's Chris Timberlake. I come from a background in software development. I've worked a lot on different open source projects. I am currently employed with GitLab. Been working with GitLab for about 2 years, some employment work, some contract work, kind of helping enterprises build out their CI/CD pipelines and their structures and everything, right? So kind of teaching them how to move quicker, how to build things quicker, and just kind of like the theory behind DevOps, like why do we do things a certain way in programming development, et cetera. Prior to that, I spent about 4.5 to 5 years with Red Hat, helping Red Hat kind of work with helping different Red Hat customers build like distributed computing clusters and basically OpenShift and Kubernetes clusters and deploying those clusters kind of everywhere. And then before that, I did a lot of open source development. So I guess for this, what we're talking about is I'm essentially the co-founder of Abstract OS and Abstract Studio alongside Ryan here. So I'll go ahead and let Ryan do his introduction.
My start was pretty much just always making businesses, just starting up startups. I never really got interested in really anything else. So um, though most didn't really go as planned, I've learned quite a lot from that. And I find that, uh, over time, uh, I've really figured out the kind of like the most like interesting thing, and I think I've I've found this to be something that I always think about, like like if we continued. So I find I don't I don't really have much of like a professional background. Like I haven't worked at like Dropbox or anything, but I really just kind of create businesses, make art, kind of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think your designs kind of speak for themselves in terms of capability and artistic design, right? A little bit of background for the viewers. So this project was kind of born out of kind of like when Elementary OS was new in like 2013, 2014, I want to say, like it was a ways back. It was always this idea of building this suite development toolkit, right? And that's kind of where we started off with something called like Elementary OS Studio, and we were trying to build a really good, IDE for elementary that would really kind of bring developers into the platform. The thought there is that, hey, if you bring, it was kind of a bigger thought, like, hey, if you bring really good development tooling that allows developers to do cross-platform development on Elementary OS, maybe some of those developers from like OS X and Windows will kind of cross over, right? It was kind of the thinking. And so started out kind of building that out and really wanted to build out a really first class like platform to kind of bring people into Elementary OS. And then, there's a difference of opinion and direction and so forth. And then, the elementary team came out and said, hey, please don't use our branding. Totally reasonable. So it was kind of like, well, what do we do with our branding at that point? Like, where do we go with it? And then thus the concept of, Abstract Studio was born. And we were kind of stalled for like the longest time because we started working on it. Personal things kind of came into play. We really wanted to build it. Ryan here built some amazing designs for the toolkit and the platform, and we started like kind of working with it and programming it and working and moving along. But one of the things that always stalled us was twofold, right? So we always wanted to use GTK, and we always wanted it to be cross-platform and work with GTK and cross-platform. And Abstract Studio was always meant to kind of be cross-platform, where you could build one application and have it work on multiple platforms. But we always ran into this problem where either GTK wasn't up to par on that, like OS X or Windows support of it was lower, or it just wasn't there. And so we kind of stopped and retreated a little bit. We're kind of like, well, if that's the case, like how do we really can keep that idea going, right? And it was a really kind of hard kind of thought process there. And then the thought kind of came around, well, what if we built our own like UI toolkit to be able to handle that and kind of take that off and work with that? Still it's a really hard problem, right? Having a first-class UI toolkit across all three platforms where somebody could just build an application once and have it run across all three. And so we were stalled for like the longest time, wanting to push it forward, everything, but it's a really hard problem. So that's kind of like the history of where we were at and kind of like a high level thing. And then the idea, I was thinking about this like over the last year, like Brian and I had always wanted to build out Abstract Studio and really build out a really good Linux desktop and operating system and toolkit and the whole thing. And it was kind of like last year before the pandemic hit, we were talking about it and kind of had the idea, well, like, why don't we build our own operating system, right? Why don't we start down the road of kind of designing our own operating system? And then we really started seeing the change in the Linux landscape, right? You start seeing, PinePhone coming out and Linux phones really taking a front seat to the stage, and we really start seeing, like really portable Linux computing really coming across. And then, in addition to that, you start seeing like Apple and Google kind of locking things down a little bit more, and people really asking for a lot more freedom with their devices. And it's kind of like almost creating like a perfect storm for a new operating system to come out that has that capability of building applications that run across different platforms, right? So what if you have an OS? The thought process was like, what if you have a really good OS that's on your mobile phone or on your tablet or on your computer, and the applications that you buy and use work across all three platforms, right? What if you have one where the UI for your application works across all three platforms, but it isn't responsive, right? It's not a user interface where everything resizes and looks really crappy on desktop because it's built primarily as a mobile app. Or if you shrink everything down and slam it together and put it on a mobile app, that it looks really cramped and isn't fun to use, like isn't good to use, right? So that's kind of where the idea of Abstract OS and reviving Abstract Studio comes around. Is we can really build an operating system that works on those platforms, and also build an IDE and a platform and a way of programming that will allow a developer to build an application with their business layer logic and then the user interface logic, and have the application kind of switch the UI between mobile, desktop, and tablets, so that you can kind of target all of those things and not have a really crappy user interface, but also kind of provide a little bit of flexibility. It adds a little bit to the development, sure, but you get a better application in the end, right? And then we still support users' freedom as much as we can. And yeah, that's kind of like the overarching idea, I guess. If that kind of makes sense.
But we don't have a live feedback.
Yeah, I know. We'll read the comments later where everybody tells us we're dumb. The other thing too is, and this is kind of a contentious thing, right? Is when we build this out, the idea, like the targeted user isn't your average Linux user. It's probably your average Windows user, OS X user, business user, right? Like, I really hate when people in the Linux community are like, "Oh, well, it worked on my computer." You're like, "Yeah, it worked on your computer, but it's not working on mine." And the configurations are different and this, that, and the other thing, like it's not working on mine. Or, oh, it worked on my computer. Okay, cool. Well, it's not working on mine. Well, okay, here's this kernel patch you apply. Here's these configuration files you go change. Here's this other thing you go do and do this other thing. And like you end up like going down that rabbit hole and you're like, yeah, it's working. And then you reboot your computer and one of the config files gets overwritten, right? And you're back to square one. Like the usability of Linux, I think, really needs a good touch, right? Like, I mean, elementary kind of helped out with that, but they're so locked down, like they don't even allow desktop icons? Like, where's the user freedom in that? You're trading capability for an OS prison, feels like. But that's just my thing. So, what do you think, Ryan? You think like, what are you thinking about this? Like, in terms of mobile, in terms of having like an application that can be developed across all 3 platforms, like what is your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm pretty used to that already as I've been focusing on web development. So having something work across all platforms just makes the most intuitive sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think having perhaps a similar development environment where that makes that you know easy, or at least make it very approachable,
Sure.
uh, has a tremendous amount of advantage, especially with the freedom that
Yeah.
abstract is.
Yeah, I mean, there's capabilities to do the things that we're talking about, right? Like, there's definitely like Electron and React, but when you talk about phones and like OS, like, I think that there's something there. There's something missing, right? Like, it's one of those things where it's like, sure, you can do it, but it's not mainstream. Like, everybody that I know anyways, and this could just be my own little, like, my own little community of people, it's by no means a statistical representation, but a lot of the people that I know like really hate using the Facebook mobile app, right? And that, part of that stems from using React and React Native and stuff in the cross-platform side. So uh, the things that we're targeting, to be clear, I think with this would be something that's a bit more low level, right? A more native application and native source code. Web technologies are great, but I feel like there's something missing, right? When we're talking about like the next generation of computers and the next generation of what's coming, like the Pinebook, right? An ARM laptop that kind of is low power, it's cheap. You're looking at something like that. It's cheap but quality, right? You're looking at something like that. You really, and the way Apple's kind of doing things, like the computing world's kind of changing, right? Like Apple, I don't see a world where MacBooks and OS X really open up a lot. You know what I mean? Like, you look at their world, and I'm kind of going off on a tangent. I promise we'll go back to topics and projects, but I don't see a world in where Apple kind of like opens things up a bit more to allow people to utilize to having more freedom. Like, I see their hardware becoming a lot more locked down with the M1 and the ARM chips. But I do think ARM's the future. I just think that you're going to lose some freedom on the Apple side of things when that happens, more than you already have, right? But a lot of people that I know are okay with that and still use Apple in despite of that, because that's a tomorrow problem, right? That's oh, my hard drive's broken, so I can't recover my data. Like, that's a tomorrow problem. The today problem is like, they need good applications to develop. They need good applications to do, their work and their business and so forth. And so that's a tomorrow thing. So, but I would really like Abstract OS to be an OS that is built on Linux. It's capable, runs on multiple devices, and really provides a really seamless and strong ability for developers to build applications, right? I think that that's the case. So, unless you have anything to add to that, I'd like to kind of transition into our repo and talk about the way our repo is set up a little bit, kind of talk about the
Yeah.
structure. Okay, cool. Give me 1 second here. Let me screen share here. Screen share my handy dandy window. All right, sweet. So, this is our repo. I put everything on GitLab, and the reason why I chose GitLab over GitHub is because of, I think their CI/CD is better, and I like the fact that they have groups. GitHub's great, but I feel like that there's much left to be desired in some of the features. And some of the features I feel like are a little bit more difficult to get brought up. The other aspect of that is this. You look at the GNOME project, you look at Red Hat, you look at what was CentOS, you look at a lot of the projects on the GTK GNOME side, a lot of them are using GitLab. And so I figured it's just kind of it's a natural thing, right? If we want to integrate with those projects at any moment, we can do so. So I've tried to keep everything kind of smart and in groups. So from the top, we have the abstract web group. And where this is going to be is our main Abstract Studio and Abstract Org website. Both of these websites are in this directory, and they actually support GitLab pages. So both of these websites are actually supported by GitLab. So if I open up a new tab, for example, and I go to abstractstudio.co, well, apparently that can't access that for some reason. You know, demos always fail. Let's take a look here. Should be, oh, right, because the domain's not working right. So let's pull this up. I gotta verify the domain before the domain works, but this is
I
what
always
it's
do live
like.
debugging.
What? Yeah,
I
live
always do
debugging.
live debugging.
Yeah, things always break in the demos. And don't shoot me for your design here. I know the fonts are wrong. But like this is the website is here, right? It's automatically hosted here in GitLab pages. And whenever you make a change to the website in this repository, right? Whenever you make a change to it whatsoever, a pipeline kicks off and automatically deploys it. So same thing's true for abstract.org. We don't have that one set up yet, but the same thing is true for abstract.org. So all of our website stuff kind of lives there, and we have CI/CD pipelines to kind of deploy everything, so we don't have to do anything manually. So applications, right? So we have a couple things here. We've got Abstract Studio, and I've punched in some of the source code for Graphene and Baseline. We have to go through those and fix those because it's built on older versions of Vala, and it's built on some of the older libraries. So we're going to have to go through and fix those, and that's definitely on my task list to do, as well as to roll out the other applications. But we'll talk about that here in a few moments. We have Exposition here, which is the Abstract OS storefront. It's locked at the moment, and it's only viewable by members of the project. So anybody who's added to the Abstract group as a member. And the reason why that is, while we're trying to be as transparent about things as possible, we realize with the store, before we really lock down a design and really knock down the source code and stuff, there's some security concerns and audits that we're going to have to work on before we make it public. And when we get there, but that's a ways down the road, right? Before we actually pull the store. And the store's name is Exposition. One thing to keep in mind is, back in the day when we had Abstract Studio, a lot of the naming and conventions that we were trying to do was trying to do with like mountain climbing or mountaineering, right? And Exposition, well, it has a specific meaning in mountaineering. So
Graphene does too.
yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah, I mean, we're just trying to keep all the names something to do with mountaineering. It seemed cool at the time. So helpers, this is where like all of our infrastructure's code goes and all of our Docker containers goes. I should probably make this one open. I'll go ahead and do that right now. There's not really a reason why it needs to be private. So we have 2 images currently. We expect that there's going to be more Docker images. The first image that we have is called Vala-Builder, which is basically it's an Alpine Docker image that has all of the tools to build Vala applications. And then we have Alpine Builder, which is a container used to build and deploy Alpine OS images, right? We're not currently using this. We'd like to, but we're not currently using Alpine Builder at the moment. I have a server setup that builds the operating system itself. Then we have application templates. So under application templates, what we're going to be building is some getting started images for people so that they can just kind of take that getting started image, clone that repo or whatever have you, and have a fully working project that they can start building their application from. And those getting started images will obviously include, a CI/CD pipeline on GitLab to automatically build and deploy your applications. When we build a store and we build repos and stuff, that's a bit down the road, but the general idea is that we would have a store and we would have public repos. And you could submit your application to either one of those, either the store or the public repos. In either case, we would have tools that go through, do security scanning, and checks and validations of the applications, and then provided they pass the security thing, there's no malware inside them, there's no viruses or anything, then we give it a thumbs up, and it goes inside our public repo automatically. And the general idea is that these application templates will include all the logic necessary to really get started with that, just like right out of the box. That's kind of the thought there. We expect for the Alpha 1 to be able to have a lot of these developer things kind of worked out so that a lot of the developers can kind of go with it. And also we're going to be dog fooding, right? So when we start building the next, when we start rebuilding the Graphene and baseline code bases to make them a lot more standardized with the new standards that we're kind of rolling out, they're also going to be following these templates and dog fooding that same code for building and deploying. So we can make sure that they're solid, right? So we're going to dog food that. So it's not like, hey, why isn't our application getting started broken? We'll notice that way off in the beginning because our own stuff won't work. So this repo right here is called Valder. It's actually Vala Welder is the full name. It was originally created by Lucas Grabsky. You can see here, which is his original GitHub repo for Valder activity. I opened up a pull request to take over maintainer of the project. You can see here and kind of explained everything that we were doing with it. And Lucas, and I hope I'm not saying your name wrong. Lucas kind of said, "Good luck with it. Go ahead and take it over." What this is it's essentially it's a project that will, or it's a tool that will basically build your Vala source code and package your application for Debian and send it to a repository, as well as do other various things like Vala Doc and so forth. I expect that we're going to use this and expand this a bit to be able to package it for Abstract OS, and that way developers can build an application and package it for Abstract OS, Debian, Red Hat, and be able to also send it to our stores, make it real easy that way. So this tool will be able to build your Vala application and do just about everything that you need. Open source tool, we expect to kind of build it out. Currently the plugin build is broken for some reason. I have an issue open to fix that. It's not, it doesn't load and it doesn't work. And I've originally, when he first built it, he called it Bob the Builder. And there's still some branding in there for Bob the Builder. We need to get rid of that. It's fine. For the pipelines, this project runs and builds via a pipeline. I'll go to the top because there's a lot of stuff here. It runs and builds in the pipeline. It's using our Vala Builder image, right? So it's using our Vala Builder image, and it's going through, and the whole entire application builds in a Docker container. There's multiple components to it. So the first thing we're doing is we're building the library, then we're building the command line side of it, and then we're building each and every plugin. And as you can see here, it builds everything in the container, and then it takes everything and uploads it as an artifact. So you can download and browse the artifacts whenever you want. If you click browse here, you can see that it's got Bob, and then it's got the plugins folder, which has all the plugins. And then it's got the lib file accordingly. So every time that pipeline kicks off and builds, it creates a new version of Vala Welder. Eventually, we'll be utilizing Vala Welder to build Vala Welder as soon as we get that build plugin fixed, and then we'll also be utilizing it to we'll be putting it in the Vala helper image eventually. This last repo's designs. I've taken all the designs that Ryan and I worked at, or mostly Ryan has worked at over the years, and I've tried to put them all in their individual folders accordingly. Most of them are sketch designs. I think there's a couple XD ones in there that I was working on, but basically they're all pretty much in here for brand, icons, everything's in here. I've also included some design documents. So for example, our mission statement, I added a brief roadmap of things that we want to do. What we consider, Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Alpha 3, just kind of planning out our roadmaps there accordingly. I've also created a number of issues where we can kind of talk and collaborate about designs and so forth that's needed. One of the things that we're going to need is, a desktop environment. For the beginning releases of Abstract OS, we're going to borrow some of the desktop environments from Elementary OS, but after that, we're going to be building our own. That's just to get the OS up and working, and then we're going to be taking those and kind of building our own from that. And this is kind of us, openly talking about the designs and so forth. We want to try to keep all of our conversations about things and get live issues so that they're all kind of open, and everybody can contribute. That's one of our key ethos pieces, is that everybody can contribute to Abstract OS. That's kind of one of the big things. We want to make sure that everybody feels that they can contribute, and every contribution, no matter how big or small, is considered and appreciated. So we get down here to Abstract OS build. And this is basically what this is it's a repo that kind of builds out the Abstract OS. Abstract OS is going to be based on Alpine. Although we're going to deviate from Alpine in a lot of key ways, we are going to initially be built on Alpine. What we have here is we have a couple of issues created. We want to do an ARM build process. We're talking through whether we want to do OpenRC or systemd, and we need to add a build process for mobile development, or for mobile, which is also so there's ARM images, right? And then the build process for mobile uses a separate kernel for mobile. Talking through the pipelines, right? So if we look at one of these pipelines, we've got a build image stage, right? And what this build image stage does is it goes through and it basically will build out both an IMG file to be flashed to a device, and a QCOW image to be imported into like VirtualBox or VMware or some other form of virtual management. What this basically does is it uses Alpine Make Virtual VM image, goes through and basically builds a VM image, right? So it starts off with like the Alpine base, builds file system, builds everything, and then it turns around and starts, installing the base system for Alpine. Configures all the different parts of it, right? Configures the bootloader, configures base system services, additional packages, gets everything installed and set up and configured. So once everything's installed, then we have a set of configuration scripts that happen afterwards. These scripts set up time zones and networking. They set up services. They enable X11. They enable GNOME. They set up the branding, build a user account. They're basically the scripts that happen after the base OS is set up, where we kind of build everything out. Some of these will eventually be moved to an install process, right? So a first run install process. So we've got like setting up time zone, right? That's a very user-centric choice. And so is some parts of networking. So those will initially be moved to like a first run wizard or an install wizard. Same thing with some of the user accounts. Right now, this image sets up, it has a root account by default, right? But it also sets up an installer user account, so not everything's running as a root. And then if we click browse right here, you can see the two images that are here. For our artifacts, every time we run that build script or whatever, it creates an artifact. So that's kind of how that's set up. You can dig through the source code of the repo later. Abstract theme is going to be for our GTK 3.0 and 4.0 theme. We are still going to be targeting GTK. We're going to be targeting GTK 4.0. But we're not going to make the switch for 4.0 for a little bit until we can start working on our own desktop environment. The other thing is that eventually a pie in the sky goal is to get off of GTK entirely and build our own UI library. But we can't focus on that because it's going to slow us down eventually, right? It's going to slow us down, and we're going to be like in this constant cycle of, building up our own UI rendering layer. That's not a small undertaking. At some point, we would like to do that, but it requires a lot of resources and funding, which we just don't have. So, and then the last one's something called Abstract Silo, and Abstract Silo is going to be our documentation and development portal for all developers. So that'll be like what Voladoc kind of spits out. So when we build documentation for all of our services and applications and everything, it's going to be in a tool called Abstract Silo. And then for our developer portal, like if you're, our store is not going to be ran off of repositories. It's going to be ran differently. And inside our store, everything is going to be running off of a containerized thing. Right now, we're working with libappimage, but that could change. And generally and ideally, that development portal developers are going to have to upload their applications and kind of say, hey, this is how much I want to charge. This is how much I don't want to charge. This is the regions I want to sell it in. And then there's the user-centric stuff like security, right? So we do want people to have the freedom of installing applications outside the store. We're not going to do anything that requires blocking that. But if you install an application through the store, there's going to be like a certain level of requirements, right? So as a developer, you're going to have your application request access to hardware resources. It's not going to be something where, somebody installs an application from the store and now they can access your webcam. It's going to be a series of permissions. They're going to have to ask for permissions for it. It's really important that applications in the store and developers of the platform respect and appreciate a user's decision to give them permissions to things like webcam and GPS and things like that. And that kind of walks through the repo mostly, and it kind of walks through where we're at. Everything we're doing is going to be in issues on the repo, on the group. So everything that we build and do is going to be in the issues. And as we build things out, this group on GitLab's gonna ebb and flow and change and grow and all of those things. So Ryan, since we don't have an audience and I just kind of like did a whole bunch of word soup walking through everything, do you have any questions about anything in the repo? Or do you have anything that any questions that users might have about the repos?
Didn't really have anything.
Okay, cool,
I think you did a good job explaining it all.
cool. Then with that, I think we're gonna kind of start out closing. I will hope that we're gonna try to set these meetings up so that they happen every, I want to say 2 weeks. We're gonna figure out the schedule of that. Where they happen every 2 weeks, where we kind of go over things and where we're at and decisions. And we're gonna be uploading those to like a, I don't know, Abstract Unfiltered YouTube channel or something. And these meetings will just be raw. So every 2 weeks, figure we'll have a meeting and talk about stuff and talk about where we're at, talk about things that have changed, and kind of go from there. So yeah. So thanks folks for watching.
Thank
I
you,
guess,
Edward.
yeah, I guess we'll close it out. Cool.